So this past Raw was awesome. Went to it live. Super fun. But I do have some bones to pick storyline wise. We're not going to let up on the brakes despite being there in person. It was a super fun event at the Garden. I was super blessed to get some tickets last minute and stuff like that for both Raw and NXT. We'll cover NXT kind of in a separate video just because I haven't watched it in a while. So I kind of want to do like a lapsed fan, kind of a black and gold fan watching NXT, in 2026 for the first time type of video. During this Raw, we actually had a segment essentially that we initially thought was between Paul Heyman and Seth Rollins, where Heyman kind of came back out for another time, kind of post Brock Oba and him being out for a huge segment that was super fun. Kind of comes out and eventually kind of leads into Seth Rollins and talking about how he essentially got arrested by the cops last week for putting his hands on Heyman, and that kind of leads Rollins to come out and attack Heyman, and Gunther kind of comes out and sidelines Seth with a sleeper to R, like super surprised. Like I remember like seeing it and I was like super surprised who it was until I saw the dude put the sleeper on Seth and I was like, oh, it's Gunther. I think it is cool that both Seth and Gunther, who have been kind of tied together a little bit just kind of due to that world heavyweight title and been floating around each other, are finally getting to have that match and essentially feud that's going to culminate at Mania. It gives something for Gunther to do, but I think with the John Cena announcement that we also got during this Raw, I feel like there are actually better plans we could have had for Gunther, coming this Mania that would have given him much more heat, directly involved with the Cena hosting, right? Kind of with that happening, I know, it's really good that Gunther and Seth are going to have a really good showcase one-on-one match that I think hopefully kind of Gunther goes over on. I mean, I think either way, both these guys are already at the top, you know what I mean? So either way, each of them is probably going to contend for a title after this feud, and I think that's kind of the signifier of what this feud's going to be. And I think Gunther going after Seth is kind of I went over all the top guys, retired all the best that are that have been. I need to beat the best that is right now, and then eventually he will beat either the best in the world in CM Punk, I think, eventually for his third title reign, but we'll see what happens with that. But I do think having Cena maybe come out to open Mania, right, as the host, and he's kind of riling up the crowd, freshly retired, and this is the first time we're getting to see him in the ring, essentially since that heartbreaking retirement match, right? And you can have Gunther come out and essentially you don't have to have him damper on things, but you can even have Cena finally get his maybe a little bit of a comeuppance a little bit, or have some sort of verbal jabs where you have someone else kind of come out in his defense. Maybe that could have been Seth, or maybe a debuting NXT roster guy who gets a good showing against Gunther, but it gets chopped down. I think something like that could have, you could have had even Mello kind of, I think, defend Cena in his defense, because maybe even in having Cena having the one up on Gunther, you don't want to kind of undo the initial finish of Cena kind of knowingly giving up, right, of that tap. So you would definitely have Cena maybe giving him some verbal jabs, right, for us, and then eventually I think maybe Mello giving him something to do at Mania, give him Gunther essentially, and Gunther might win in really, I think you can have a Mania Classic between the two of them that puts Gunther on top but makes Mello look extremely good in defeat and gives him kind of that WrestleMania rub in that one-on-one match with someone who is at the top of the card that really legitimizes maybe Mello for a lot of the fans. Well, that's kind of the architect kind of build I have there for if they were to do a segment. I do think there are places they can go with Gunther and Seth. Like I said, they both hovered around the world heavyweight title, so it's we can kind of stake the claim to the number one contendership with whoever wins with Roman and Punk on kind of the Seth and Gunther match. It is just kind of interesting, I think, how instead of just doing, I feel that obvious kind of segment between Gunther and Cena, and having someone else kind of being involved, we kind of have this Seth match put together with Gunther, and maybe if they do if there is some sort of huge turn of events essentially, and Paul Heyman potentially is aligned with Gunther, I do think that is huge money, because I think Paul Heyman kind of trying to align himself right now with the most dangerous essentially the most dangerous person in the company, is kind of in line with his current character right now. And I do think that, you know, with obviously Gunther's insane track record over the last, or over his whole career literally here in WWE, you know, I think Paul Heyman would want to attach himself to that type of success, right? It just, there's a lot of cool things I do think that do come out of this Seth and Gunther situation, especially with, like I said, the Paul Heyman attachment. So it's kind of really cool to think about. But I do think that there is more merit really in Gunther and Cena having another interaction at WrestleMania, especially in the capacity where Gunther essentially can kind of talk down Cena, and, you know, we can build up another face potentially in addressing maybe a Gunther open challenge that he does right in Cena's face to mock him that he can't wrestle anymore or something. You know, like I think there's a lot of things you can do there, you know, that are really interesting. But I do think if we get like a 30, you know, 25 minute, 20 minute match between, you know, Gunther and Seth, I can't complain. That's like, it's probably going to be a classic, you know, especially if they let them go all out, or if, you know, like I said, there are some specific story implications that imply, like, you know, a Paul Heyman betrayal or some sort of like new alignment that Gunther has or something up his sleeve, you know. I think that would be a really interesting kind of addition to the whole shebang if they do that. But it did kind of feel, even when I was in the arena, it kind of felt kind of last minute. It was a cool, the initial surprise of Gunther coming to attack Seth. But once again, this is kind of the, I know Seth is kind of the face in this instance, but both the characters initially work better as heels. So this is kind of like feels like anti-hero versus monster heel kind of dynamic, which to me is kind of off. But I think since these are both fan favorites, you know, we're kind of going to get a lot of fanfare going into Mania regardless, right? This could be a main event of any pay-per-view if it was for a world title. So I can't really complain too much. I just think that Gunther should be, I think Gunther and Seth have done a lot this year and have carried that world heavyweight title and have elevated it to a really high status. And I get fighting each other at Mania is kind of representative of that, but I do also think they both have more, they did so much to be, I think, a lot higher on the card possibly. But like I said, or, you know, like WWE is, you can't have everybody at the top, right? It makes total sense what they've done with both night main events to draw as much as they can right now. But I do think that, you know, even in that capacity, I think for Gunther it would have been more better suited for him to kind of maybe even be just involved in some sort of segment at Mania, at least, where he's annoyed that he's not contesting for a title, so then he does come and hijack Cena's, you know, hosting duties. I think that would really serve stories, and, you know, have Gunther's like constant kind of rain parade on pro wrestling continue with him trampling on Cena's hosting of WrestleMania. It's kind of crazy. This whole Raw kind of essentially put the whole almost WrestleMania card together, so we're gonna have to like put out a bunch of videos kind of talking about everything. But for the first part, I just want to talk about this Seth and Gunther segment and what that kind of implies and what I think they could have maybe done really with Gunther. I think Seth also should have just maybe interfered in like the Oba and Brock match and have like that can be like a legit match between the two of them, but I think it could be something similar to like the Roman and Brock thing at SummerSlam, where like both sides are getting thrown at each other because there's division, there's Heyman involved, there's Seth involved, and there's so many things that it can be this really crazy overbooked like monster versus monster match that's super fun, where both of them are overcoming these crazy obstacles that each side is kind of throwing at each other. We'll see if they actually do that. They might, you know, because I think Triple H is really good at, and their team is really good, in my opinion, at producing matches at a crazy level with crazy production and doing that stuff. And I always think about that Roman Reigns Lesnar SummerSlam match that I think is such an awesome, like, perfect representation of what WWE can do at its full potential with like the sports entertainment, the crazy camera angles, all the different stuff that they can use to make if things feel like a movie. Yeah, we'll kind of see what kind of goes on onto this road to WrestleMania. We're only like 2 weeks away. We're already in April. You know, happy April Fool's Day, everybody. We'll be putting out a lot more videos kind of covering all of Raw, NXT, and then also AEW as well. There's a lot to talk about with that as well. And yeah, I'll let you guys go, and I'll see you guys in the next video.